Welcome to Liquid, how CFOs outperform. I'm your host, Tom Gavigan. Today, I'm joined by two special guests, both coming from Mews. I want to welcome Daniel Ahremark, who's the CFO and COO of Mews, and also Hemant Godhwani, who is the VP of Corporate Finance and Treasury. Welcome, gentlemen.
Hello there, Tom. It's a pleasure to be here.
Very much looking forward to our conversation here today. Before we do jump into some deeper conversations around the current market and conditions and things we're all facing, I'd like to get started just by asking some general questions, learning a little bit more about you both. Daniel, I guess I'll start with you. What's something you've learned one way that you would do differently now?
Well, one super interesting thing about this space and like the years of evolution that we've seen and the cycles of technology we've gone through the last couple of years is that nothing that I was taught when I started this profession is actually the same as it is as of today. We used to find ourselves with legacy mainframe technology. We used to talk and have heated debates about if something was to be on-prem because that gave a sense of security and governance when it came to the structures that we built. And that is very different from where we are at this point in time. So I would say if I had to pick something, I would absolutely say that it's the tools that we use for this trade and the speed of which that allows us to iterate for sure.
Yeah, I would agree. And I think we have this conversation 6 months, 9 months, 12 months from now. It might be even more different, especially with the evolution of AI and large language models and how data is going to fit into that more long term. Hemant, if I can pass it over to you, as somebody who's managing and operating the treasury of Mews today, what's getting the most attention right now from you and your team?
Yeah, absolutely, Tom. I think let me try to break down the answer into two parts. One is macro and the other is micro. So from a macro perspective, of course, inflation and interest rates is something where we keep a very close eye on. So as you would have seen, especially in the Western world, the inflation has been stickier than what had been anticipated, say 6 to 12 months ago, which means that central banks have had to keep interest rates very high to counter the inflation. And what that gives us are both risk and opportunities. So I think given we operate in the hospitality industry, the high inflation leaves limited disposable income for, travelers, which means that they will visit some of the hotels less often than they used to before the high inflation rate period, which means that it may impact the revenue that we can make off of them. But on the other hand, we are an integrated SaaS and payments company. We have a very strong payments arm. So given the prices or the inflation is higher, whichever travelers do travel, they spend a lot with us, or they do spend on food or drinks or restaurant, whatnot. And that means that we do earn or we do make that money back on the payments side. I think that also is quite important from a treasury perspective, because if we have to park our cash, I think if we can find avenues where the interest rates are higher, that actually helps us to counterbalance some of the higher interest rates that we need to pay. So I think that's important from a macro perspective. I think on the micro side, I would say automation is something that I'm really, really focused on. As we scale, we're trying to move a lot of our processes from manual to automated. Just to give you an example, we are implementing Kyriba TMS that will help us automate a lot of the manual processes like managing bank accounts, managing authorizations, reporting, and so on and so forth. And this will really, really help us scale very, very fast. So I think that is a big focus area for us as well.
Yeah, it makes sense. I would also want to ask, I guess, from a macro perspective, COVID, the pandemic was, it was a long time ago, but it wasn't. I think the scar tissue's there. And I think specifically for hospitality, that's a big thing, I would still think, in some way, shape, or form that you're just keeping an eye on in terms of that, global event that directly impacts how people travel and if they travel at all, right?
Yes and no. So we saw coming straight out of COVID, we had, of course, the hike of revenge travel, trademark pending, in terms of how that, where we saw travelers coming back. We had built up willingness to spend and pay and travel as well. We've seen that normalize slightly. We're now in a position where we have more of a steady state that we saw back in 2019 for the casual traveler, and we see business travel back at full swing again. That took slightly longer than the leisure side, primarily because I think that businesses through the forcing function of COVID, had to come into a place where they started using Teams, Zoom, and all the technologies that came around that. But we're now finding ourselves at similar levels as we did back in those days, both from an occupancy perspective in hotels, but also in the number of occupied seats within the air traffic elements of this. I would say that one of the things that is working to our favor when it comes to what came out of COVID, albeit a very traumatizing experience for the industry for sure, regardless if you're on the hotel side or provider to the very same thing, is that the risk appetite from the financial industry on the back of that towards our sector is de minimis, if anything at all. So when you find yourself in the vertical SaaS space, and you service across the payment scape, the FX space, and the like adjacent products to come, it is a really nice opportunity and space to be in terms of how we can service them, because we obviously have a unique point of view when it comes to the primacy that the core systems of your operation gives, and the ability to serve in a as bespoke fashion as is possible, given the unique industry needs when it comes to seasonality, credit risk, and various bits and bobs towards the very same thing. So it was, could we go back and have it not happen? I think everyone would do that instantly. But given what is now starting to come out from a more stabilized perspective, we're seeing a lot of opportunity on the back of what the new normal looks like for the hospitality industry.
Yeah, no, interesting. As somebody who travels quite often, it's a full flight every single time. Doesn't matter where you're going, and that's a great thing for the economy in general. Obviously, also great for what you guys are doing there at Mews. And as finance leaders, there's a lot of moving parts in what we do day in and day out, and ultimately. Individuals like yourself within the CFOs and the office of the CFO, ultimately looking in ways in which they can outgrow, outperform, outlast the competition with the capital that we ultimately have. What we want to get into now is what we call the Chief Outperformance Officer is our next segment. And in this segment, what I want to do is I'll start with you, Daniel, and I'll ask a couple of questions to kind of start us off here and then pass it over to you, Hemant. Daniel, can you describe your relationship overall with Hemant and the Treasury office itself and how you guys are partnering together for the benefit of Mews?
That's a good one. I love him. Let's start there. Jokes aside, I find that the place that I go to when I think about Treasury as part of the CFO office is that sounds megalomaniac to say, but I do truly feel that it's the heart of the CFO office. It is the thing that pumps life into the rest of the organization, because it is the place where you raise your equity, you manage your debt, you manage your cash, you manage your assets. And we usually find ourselves coming into a place where we talk a lot about the P&L, right? We talk a lot about the revenues we make. We talk a lot about the costs we go through. Talk a lot about the cash flows, where they end up, what's the timing of those cash flows, right? And how can we make sure that AP, AR, and revenue are as matched as possible at all given points in time. But what we usually miss in that equation is the more fundamental aspects of life if you are a business. And that is the fact that you need funding, you need efficient funding, and you need to be able to optimize that funding to the best of your ability to ensure that we stage the people who contribute to the activities that we talk about in the P&L in the first place. So we're in verticalized SaaS, right? We do the SaaS proposition, which is the property management solution and the adjacencies of that for hotels, but we also do the entire payments flow. And when you're coming to the fintech place, you're in a really interesting space when you think about Treasury, right? Because if you look at the SaaS side of the house, I would argue that probably 85% is up to our R&D team in terms of how successful we are. There's 5% legal, 5% finance, and some other bits and bobs, right, to make that successful. If you look at the fintech proposition, 50% of that is R&D for sure. They need to package, we need to build something the customers love, and we need to make sure that that is the best we can possibly offer to ensure that we are competitive. 40% of success is full-on Treasury. It's the underlying rates, it's bank infrastructure, it is the nuts and bolts that actually allows the R&D team to build a product into existence in the first place, with all the regulations, all the clearing mechanics, all the settlement structures that comes on the back of that as well. So my view is twofold, something that allows us to optimize the traditional aspects of liquidity, asset, and liability management, as well as the binary aspects of life for a company. And it's also one of the main product enablers if we look at the fintech universe and the verticalized SaaS aspects of our business.
Hemant, before we move on, would want your opinion and your viewpoint. What's your relationship like with the CFO, and how's your day to day in working together as you operate the treasury there?
Absolutely, Tom. So I think Daniel is a fantastic boss. Like, I'm very, very happy to have joined Muse and to be working with Daniel. First of all, he is extremely knowledgeable about this space, having done it throughout his career. So, of course, a real mentor to me to look up to. And then I think when it comes to relationship and working together, I think, as Daniel said, right, Treasury, or both of us see Treasury as the guardian of the cash of the company. And as you would have heard, the adage, cash is king. So when you marry the two, basically you are in a space which is very, very important to make sure that the organization is functioning well. And especially when it comes to the large strategic bets, which will take the organization from point X to point Y in a very, very accelerated space, you do need to make sure that you have the right funding in place, you are allocating the right cash for the right bets, and that's how you become successful as a company. So both of us spend quite a bit of time thinking about it in a lot of detail and executing it on a day-to-day basis.
Yep. Cash is king is our moniker, or was our moniker for quite some time, but obviously now with the current macroeconomic landscape, right? It's all about rates as well, and equity, what's going on there in the market, or what has gone on in the market, but and then yields on the investment side of things as well, right? As those have been continuously changing here over the past few years.
Being the eternal optimist that I am, I do see that inflation rates are coming under control. I do see interest rates being cut, which bodes well not just for our industry, but in general, the overall investment environment and the equity raise and the debt raise that companies want to do. I think in addition to that, that will lead into more and more IPOs happening in the public markets. I think there has been a bit of pause, but I do see that kick starting back again, which will make sure that the entire ecosystem is much more well funded and growing better.
I would say also, again, that historic or viewpoint of cash is king. One of the things I've observed is cash hoarding in a way that's occurred, and now companies looking at ways in which they can deploy that cash, specifically in working capital programs, things like that as well. Yeah, cash is king, but what else can you do with that, right? With the investment yields, or is there supply chain financing programs that can be deployed to benefit from that cash, perhaps as well, and things like that.
100%, and especially and to build on that as well, Tom, how can you identify and make that as efficient as possible? Because I think one of the banes of this industry, which has now become possible to deal with through the use of technology and the data streams that is now becoming commoditized through the majority of asset managers and banks as well, allow us to have a more real-time view of where that cash actually is, which then correspondingly allows us to, either through physical or notional pooling, actually deploy that in a way that is practically working for us, which is very far from where we were just a couple of years ago, or even in the zero rate environment, right, where that wasn't really a topic of discussion because there was nothing to be found without unacceptable risk. But it's a more healthy environment. You won't hear me saying that when I'm raising funds, but I think it's net positive for the industry.
I completely agree. I think to go a step further now, I think broadly, you guys have some really good and diverse backgrounds in your experience. I think the audience here that's listening into this podcast is looking at it from different angles, and they're going to have different backgrounds and experiences. But to the analysts that are out there, perhaps that are listening to this, could you share one key piece of advice for those analysts as they aim to accelerate or grow through the office of the CFO there, hopefully ending up in your position, Daniel? What advice would you give them for those that are listening?
I think that the career that led to the position of the CFO historically was very traditional. It's been very traditional for a better part of almost 100 years, I would argue. But on the back of the technology shifts that we're seeing now, and the people that we are recruiting ourselves as we speak to the roles that we're filling up and building the organization to move from the startup to the scale-up motion that we're now looking to double down on, is that I wouldn't be surprised if more and more people that you find in these positions in the future actually comes with a background through engineering or through product, or they found themselves doing a stint in enterprise architecture for a couple of years as well, to be able to build out that systematic and system level thinking that becomes so vital when you're in an environment where scale really comes through technology. I think that a good thing for the analysts, to your call out, is to think about a nonlinear track. I don't think that it's going to be as many people who find themselves becoming the CFOs in the future who go from Big Four accounting towards going into an industry or a private tenant somewhere. The Big Four are private as well, but going that path and then going into the controller seat, the CAO, effectively ending up as the CFO, right? I don't think that that's going to be the career trajectory that we see in the future. I think that is going to be more of a zigzag pattern. I think it's going to move across product engineering and architecture more commonly than not if you actually to find yourself in a position where you can muster up the skill to be able to solve the tasks and the problem that needs to be solved going into the future. So that would be my thinking towards the analyst.
I'd agree. I kind of see it already occurring as somebody in my role who gets a chance to work with our existing customers and other companies like Mews that are out there, and you get to work with a broad set of people that are within the office of the CFO. You see a blending of backgrounds. It's not the traditional, oh, I studied finance and then I got a master's in finance and then I came up as a CPA or in accounting and tax. And no, you're finding people who have more of an engineering or technical background that are also in those positions now. And again, I think it's a broadening or a merging of those things that we're going to continue to see. So I would say, to echo what you're saying, your kind of advice would be, go out and continue to learn and evolve yourself outside of just the traditional debits and credits and financial metrics that we all know and study. There's much more that's going to be needed. And I guess that gets into the next question, which is, how are you approaching recruitment? I'll start with you, Daniel, but then I would go into Hemant and ask him in terms of how he's operationalizing that. But how does that impact your recruitment and how you're growing the human resources today?
That's a good question. We have a very non-traditional finance team at Mews. We find ourselves with almost half of our team coming from either a past professional career or a training discipline, which is non-finance. We see people coming out of software development. We see people coming out of mathematics, myself included. We see statisticians. We see macroeconomists. So we see various people coming from various walks of life. And I think that not necessarily only diversity, but especially diversity of thought, that those mixed backgrounds, genders, as well as religious affiliation, be that whatever, right? It brings a level of flushed through design that just makes us able to outcompete what we're coming up against when it comes to the more traditional beasts. We approach that from a perspective where we ask ourselves, is this reoccurring, or is this iterative work that is going that follows a logical pattern, and we can delineate what that logical pattern is. When we look at net new skills or domains, be that due to geo or product expansion or whatever that is, we need quote unquote traditional finance people as well, because we need that skill set. We need that type of understanding within the business. But when it comes to capacity, we default towards automation. We hire engineers to be able to deal with that because it scales so much better over time. Slightly more painful short term to build, 100%, than to just operate. But the operational risk and the scalability we get out from that approach is just outsized towards what the alternatives are.
Yeah, it's challenging, but I would argue it's also rewarding as you get an opportunity to work with those diverse kind of backgrounds. And Hemant, I'll let you also opine on this, but I think actually it's a good segment into AI, Daniel, because as you talk about operators and such, we can't avoid AI, in my opinion, and I think you would probably share in that. We have to embrace it and harness it. Hemant, what's your opinion on AI overall? What's your opinion on its impact in that recruitment, like we were just talking about? And also, what's your opinion in terms of that background and experience that you're going to be looking for from the people you're bringing into the organization?
I think AI in general has been a big change in our industry, as it has been for several other industries. And what I would highlight there is that even a couple of years ago, as you were scaling a business and you encountered capacity issues, what you typically used to do is you would find a body shop, right? Be it in Southeast Asia, be it in Latin America or whatnot, right? And you would hire a few people and you would outsource part of the work to them, and they can do that work and send it back to you. And that's how you used to manage scaling a business. However, with the advent of AI, the thinking around that has completely changed. Now, it's not about how many people can you hire, how many people, or how much outsourcing or nearshoring can you do. It's much more about can you tackle these problems in a scalable way using AI. And just to give you an example, what we are doing at Mews, I think for customer support, we have launched our AI product called Ada, which has been received fantastically well. So with Ada, we have seen a deflection of cases of around 70% plus, which is incredible. And what we saw is that the key problem in hospitality industry is of the people. So people churn every 6 months. You have students, you have people who are just coming out of college, working for 6 months and then going out. And as soon as you get a new person, they will have the same problems operating technology as their predecessor and their predecessor, and so on and so forth. So what we realized is that the questions that these guys are asking for a large portion of the time are exactly similar to what was asked 6 months ago. And that's where I think we saw a great use case of AI where we put it, and all these questions that you encounter while starting using a software system for the first time can easily be addressed using AI. So that we think is a great use case of AI, which we have been able to successfully implement to solve capacity related or cost related issues. Now, what will be even more interesting is how we can operationalize this on the top line of the revenue side and use AI to actually start generating revenue. And that's where we are doing a lot of work internally across different departments. But I don't think that time or that date is too far when we will be able to use it in a meaningful way to generate more revenue as well.
I think it's where everybody is at right now. A lot of AI utilization in terms of operations and cost containment, but how can we leverage and deploy it in such a way that we can impact the top of the line is where everybody's focused now. Piggyback on that question, I was recently at an event up in Canada, and I was speaking in front of, I would say, about 40 different people coming from similar backgrounds and experiences like us. When I asked the room about the utilization of AI, I'd probably say like 4 people raised their hands. And it was almost very hesitant. Now, I have an opinion as to why that is, but I would love to hear, Daniel, what your opinion is. And if you share something similar, we're coming, again, from diverse backgrounds and regions. You're in Sweden. Hemant, you're in London. I'm in the U.S., but was speaking up in Canada. Daniel, what's your opinion on that? Why do you think I only got 4 hands raised on that topic?
$10,000 question, right? I think we've reached a state of industry awareness where people are starting to become aware of the art of the possible, but very few have been able to get under the hood and started to understand how you actually utilize the underlying technology. And I think the ones of us who are running in the forefront in terms of actual practical utilization, we probably are the people who found ourselves building random forest models and neural networks in like the past iteration of how we use data in a succinct fashion. And we build self-training machine learning models. And there is still a level of technical sophistication that is needed to be able to break through that Rubicon and get into a place of utilization. I think that is going to become much more commoditized in the very short, very foreseeable future, because the revenue opportunity for these startups are just outsized if you start imagining what you can actually do with that. I think that it is a skill gap for sure. And some of the, looking at the funding rounds that we're seeing in the industry at this point in time, some of the most outsized rounds we're seeing is within the AI space for good reason, because there's a huge opportunity within that. But there is also going to be, as it is with every significant change of a universe or within discipline, hesitation in terms of how that can be rolled out. I think we are in a very privileged position when it comes to how we roll that out, in difference from larger enterprises, because larger enterprises probably need to find themselves doing a trade-off between investing in this technology, but they need an offset. And that offset is probably going to be paying on the payroll side. And that is a challenging thing to do, because we all love our people, right? When it comes to Mews and how we're thinking about that, and why I think we're privileged in our ability to be able to roll that out, this just means that we don't have to hire as many people next year as we were planning to do. So we can allow the people that we have to stay on the ship for all purposes and intent, but just do more fun stuff, right? use people, use brains for what brains do truly well, and that is analyze the future, build on the inorganic side where there's a lot of high EQ, high human touch elements that we need to be mindful of. You just double down on building your career and do some really fun stuff. I think it's the consequences of adoption. And I think that in some cases the technology is just simply not curated or commoditized enough for the common finance folks, if you so will, famous last words, to be able to deploy it in an intuitive fashion without using SIs who are effectively battling for the same people to be able to do that with clients screaming for utilization.
Yeah. I think it goes back to the recruitment item, which is we can't look at this as job replacement or that you're not going to hire more. It's who can embrace it and who can learn it, who can leverage it. That's what we're all going to be looking for more as we continue to grow what we ultimately do, especially, we're both speaking on behalf of technology companies and where we're seeing the adoption grow very rapidly. I'd also argue why I think that there was at this juncture, why there was perhaps, a very small set of people perhaps that were responding in the affirmative of using it is the reality of the situation is we are all finance people at heart in some way, shape, or form. We're very pragmatic. We're very logical people. And I also believe that organizations are a little bit paralyzed in utilization of AI in terms of what is allowable, what is applicable, what can I use, what can I use, and I think those things are going to get cleared out very, very quickly, and I think then open up the opportunities. But I do believe that some people are probably sitting there going, well, I don't want to breach any sort of security issues and data issues because we are all operating with very important, very sensitive data and information that we don't want to go into the wrong hands. Before we close that out, Hemant, I know you were very passionate and also on the AI topic. Anything further to share in terms of what we were just discussing, or anything that you've also seen in your sphere?
Yeah, no, absolutely. So I think what's interesting is that, a lot of companies in the traditional industries are very open to embrace AI. And just to give you an example about my past employer, so I've worked with JP Morgan for 11 years, and JP Morgan is the largest bank out there. And you would expect that they would be slow moving or would not be so open to embrace AI. However, if you hear the CEO of JP Morgan, Jamie Dimon, I think they have allocated the largest technology budget in history, and a lot of that will be allocated to AI. So I think this phenomenon is here to stay. I think everybody realizes how much you can do with it. And it's not necessarily to replace jobs. I think it will help to upskill people, because people just need different skills to survive survive in the organizations or to thrive in the organizations. I think that is something that we are also seeing at our company Mews, right? When it comes to the people we are hiring, we are more often than not going at absolute domain experts who know their space cold, or someone who can work very well at complementing that domain skill set with AI, and how they can, continue to add to the job going forward. And I think that's where a lot of our recruiting is also focused on. But net, I think this is going to be a positive for our industry, and we're all embracing it.
I want to move along to our next segment here and talk a little bit more about secrets. Now, I think our friends and family are probably listening to this, so we'll keep it business related. But we're hearing it straight from our guests, right? We all have our own tips and tricks and secrets that have gotten us to the different positions we're in today. I want to dig in a little bit more on that from some personal experiences and insight that you guys might have. Hemant, I wouldn't mind starting with you in your role. What's one key piece of advice that you would have for somebody who's looking to make change, to influence change outside of, knowing Daniel's favorite restaurants and wine perhaps, but what else would you probably offer as a point of advice where you're looking to make change? Because it does sound like Mews is very dynamic. It sounds like you guys are doing a lot. And you guys have a lot of ability to make change. How do you do it?
So the one advice that I would give, Tom, is to be bold. I think if you have to make big changes in the organization or change the way that things have been built or consumed, I think you need to be bold, and you need to bring a different perspective that can change things for the better. And what that involves also is that when you're making some of these bold bets, there is a likelihood that things can go wrong and there will be mistakes. However, unless that mistake is catastrophic for the business, I wouldn't worry about it. What I usually do, or what I would advise people to do, is to make mistakes, learn from it, but ultimately be bold in your ambition of making changes. And if in the end, you do want to create a legacy, make things for the better, you have to take that risk and you have to get off the well-trodden path and do something which can be truly differentiating.
I love that. Here at Kariba, our CEO, her mantra is "Be brave," and she forces us all to be brave. And it's not about taking risk; it's about being, like you said, being bold and making your decisions and kind of sticking with it. I would ask you, Daniel, from your perspective as the CFO, right? What would you advise to others that are within your organization if they were looking to make change? What advice would you give?
Oh, it's super basic, actually. Just come and have a chat. Like, if you have, like, I make no claims to fame in being the most intelligent guy in the room or most intelligent person in the room when it comes to the various domain expertises and the various fields that we have. Like, I'm hired because I'm a generalist. I like to buy people champagne and cheer them on. Like, all the people that work for me are smarter than me. So let's have a chat on how you see that you can make this even better than it already is. We'll allocate funding and capital accordingly based on the probability of execution and the likelihood that we can push that through, and let's get it done.
So I hear bold, and then Daniel, I hear humility and communication as well, which I think are very relatable, at least from my perspective, and I assume from most people listening to this podcast. Daniel, your background, I think, is pretty unique that you shared with me when we were first meeting each other. How do you stay ahead of things with like the world that's going on right now? And there's a different, an event, something in the news every single day. What's your secret to staying ahead of things moving forward? And what, is that something you've used to move through your career?
Good question. The simple answer, which is the boring answer, because if you heard this 1,000 times from other people as well, but it's true, is to never accept something as a steady state. Once something is in production, it can probably be iterated on, it can probably be made better, it can probably have larger impact than it already has. The question is, of course, where do you allocate that effort, right? Where is the largest opportunity in terms of how you either compress costs or create a better customer experience or drive revenue, and what's the likelihood that you can actually execute on that in the end of the day? Otherwise, you're going to die in the valley of 1,000 cuts, right? And you're never going to get anything done. So ruthless prioritization, but also never accepting that anything is good enough. You just iterate, especially as we find ourselves in the infancy of actual adaptation of AI. I think this is just gonna speed up, right? So being extremely curious and trying to stay abreast with what's going on in the industry, keeping up with your peers, not necessarily from a competitive perspective, but like make them your friends and your partners, because they're gonna figure out some smart stuff as well, right? And you're gonna figure out some smart stuff, and we can make this industry thrive together in collaboration. From a diversity of thought perspective, to your call out, I really like the cross-pollination between various teams, and it sounds like something that we've been trying to do for the better part of the last 100 years, right? Make finance teams play nice with other teams. But I think it has outsized impact when it actually happens, because it doesn't really happen that often, if we're going to be honest with ourselves, right? But the customer problems that we're solving for, if we're building a finance-facing stack, be that because we're Kariba or we're Mews and we're servicing the accountants of the hotels or whomever that audience is, right? It's exactly the same problems and use cases that we're trying to solve for from an internal perspective. And if those product folks and those engineers that figure out a really smart way to make our customers really happy, probably translates pretty well to us as well, right? But having that vertical flexibility to ensure that we cannot necessarily monetize or capitalize, but we can utilize those capabilities on a cross-functional basis within the company, I find to be truly outsized. Because if we're going to be honest with ourselves, none of us are ever going to be able to keep up with all of the different industry news that comes through this, right? I'm going to be super interested in what happens in capital markets. Hemant is probably going to be that as well. And our engineers are going to be really interested in what's happening in the AI field and what we can do around the regulation that we talked about before as well. So having those things meet in happy marriage can build something that has truly outsized impact. What does our customers want? what is their problem? Like, they're not always going to tell you that they need a fully automated solution. You might get a couple of answers and requests for faster horses, right? In the line with the old Ford quote, but you're going to get the problem. And that will inform exactly what you need to think about and what you need to solve to be able to stay relevant, to keep on innovating, to keep on transforming an industry. Everyone can deliver a rising star, right? But how do you stay at that point over time?
I assure the people who are listening, this was not scripted, but Daniel, I think you hit on two of my favorite quotes. First of all, the Henry Ford quote that you alluded to, right? If I asked people what they wanted, they would have said faster horses. I say that at least once a week, probably. The other thing you touched on was a complacency. I always, force discomfort. I think it's a good thing. One of my things I always say is, when was the last time you did something for the first time, trying something new? But I think complacency is really relevant to our market, to what we ultimately do in finance, because if we go back a little over a year ago, when in North America we had some of the mid-market banking issues that were occurring, that was complacency. Companies that were facing issues, that was, they'd forgotten about 2008, 2009 almost, and put themselves in a position of being capitalized, over structured, over positioned with certain banks, and then all of a sudden, all of those things that we had known before came back. So to your point as well, complacency is a killer. Hey man, before we move on, you had shared, right, this is working at Mews is your first time coming into the corporate world. You come from the banking world. I'm a news junkie. I'm a reader. I read ferociously, all sorts of things. What's some things out there that you go to? What's your go-to sources of information and news and things like that, in terms of what's going on in the market, what's impacting us, both from a finance perspective as well as what we've been talking about from a technology perspective, that you can share with our audience?
Absolutely. I think from a technology perspective, one news source that I've used for several years of my life is TechCrunch. I think that's one news website which really is up to date on what's going on in the technology world, and usually you will get a very good flavor of what's going on through that. In addition to that, I think there are a couple of other ways that I get my information. The first one is that at Mews itself, we have a very healthy practice of sharing information with each other, which is incredible. So for example, if one of our peer is reporting something in the public domain and there is a great report that we should read, because it will give insights into their business, but more importantly, what is the read across for us, that is shared in one or the other channels, and you consume that and you go through that and you capture that information. And as I said, right, we have so many domain experts across our organization that you can really get a flavor around product, around marketing, around commercials, around people, everything. The third thing that I would say is networking. So, right, having a good network serves you like nothing else. So usually when I'm in need for some information, I'll just call up a friend, and I'll ask them for information, or I'll say, hey, tell me what's going on here. And through that, I'm able to get a lot of the information, because sometimes just picking up the phone and calling people is much better than, looking for information on Google or trying to find something by spending 5 hours. So I think that's my go-to.
And diversity there as well, not just like it's what Daniel was sharing earlier, having those contacts within the corporate finance space, but also bankers and ones that work in finance, and then also those that are in the technology side as well. Having that network is really, really critically important. You see those circles coming closer and closer together, where I think maybe before they were kind of lived isolated, and certainly now with everything going on, you see those things coming closer and closer together, at least from my perspective. I have a couple closing questions that will maybe take us a little bit outside of just our finance and technology conversation that we've had here. Hemant, I'll start with you. You're not in corporate treasury every day. I don't think it consumes 24 hours of your day. Understanding your boss is on the conversation here, but what's your decompression look like? What are you doing outside the office these days?
I have always been a sports junkie, right? So whenever I have time, I just love to go out and play some kind of sports, be it tennis, be it badminton, be it football, whatever, it does not matter, right? So every evening, or especially on the weekends, you will, or I'll book up something and I'll just go and play something. I think in addition to that, what's really, really exciting for me. It is to catch football. So I'm a big follower of English Premier League, La Liga, and so on and so forth. So usually you'll find me either in front of a television in a pub watching these games, or actually in the stadiums following these games. And I just love to do that. So I think that's how I decompress. Although I am in a job that I love, so being part of it is great, right? I don't feel stressed because I'm in a job that I love. But sometimes when you have to do something apart from doing your work, I think that's what I usually go to.
Daniel, on your end, we were talking, you're well traveled. And I think you and I both are a fan of restaurants, food, wines, things like that. What's your favorite city that you've been to? What's your favorite food or places to go in that city?
Ooh, fair one. Cities at this point in time and age, cities tend to get value through the relationships you build and like the social structures of them as well. We're a couple of friends who try to go once a year down to Florence and just to meet up, have some food, have some wine. There's this fantastic little restaurant that we used to or still frequent called La Giostra. And their head chef now went over to Tre Pepe, and so that's where we usually go to like eat too much food, drink too much sassicaia, and just Amsterdam is the place that I find myself going to most, or London with Hemant and the team over there, right? So in Amsterdam, there's a place called Will's Restaurant, just by the old Olympic Stadium, which is perhaps one of the better dining experience that I've had in years. I love that place, but Florence has a special place in my heart for sure.
Gentlemen, thank you very much for joining today for our conversation. I got a lot out of it, and I think it was time well spent. Some very interesting topics that we were able to go across in terms of just obviously general financial topics, but I think delving into the technology and the AI is of most interest. So thank you guys for joining. And thanks to those tuning in here and the friends that joined us on the podcast here today. To never miss an episode, please do subscribe wherever you listen. And I'm Tom Gavigan. Thank you for joining us on Liquid, how CFOs outperform.